Twitter cracks and crumbles at our feet as the man behind Titania McGrath, Andrew Doyle, joins me on Modern Wisdom. Let's say that someone hasn't seen the Titania account. How would you describe it?
I would describe it as the kind of social justice activist who is very humorless, is desperate to be offended, desperate to promote her own victimhood, and is not necessarily stupid, but has swallowed this ideology to the extent that they stop being able to think for themselves.
Questions for Titania. How would she answer? Let's see how we get on.
All right.
Number one, are all cats feminists? Which is the most oppressive vegetable?
It's like when Little Mix tweeted about the bombing of Syria. They sent an apology saying, we're so sorry to the people of Syria. I bet the people of Syria were thinking, great, at least Little Mix have got our back. Look, I'm not saying these people shouldn't have the right to have an opinion. Of course they do, but I don't give a shit what Little Mix think about Syria. We are living in a culture where people are self-censoring out of fear of either what your peers will say, what the people on social media are going to do to you. You know, in the UK, we have a horrible situation where we have hate speech laws that have led to people being imprisoned for jokes they've written on Facebook.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Twitter cracks and crumbles at our feet as the man behind Titania McGrath, Andrew Doyle, joins me on Modern Wisdom. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Such a dramatic opening.
I know.
Yeah, it's almost apocalyptic. I like it.
It's kind of appropriate though, right?
Well, I don't know. Like a Deus Ex Machina, I've sort of descended from the heavens.
That's exactly why you're here.
Yeah, I just got the train. It's not as exciting.
Yeah, like a phoenix from the ashes.
Yeah.
So, how have you been the last few weeks?
I'm alright, I'm just a bit knackered because I was out with a friend late last night, really late.
Yeah, but fully functioning.
I'm alright. He was over from Sweden, so I didn't have a choice. I had to see him. But yeah, I'm good. But I've been all over the place. I've been back and forth various places. I'm not a good traveller. I get really tired. So
okay.
I'm just So I'm a bit frazzled. That's why.
Totally fine.
And that's good because that means anything I say that's inappropriate, I can blame on my condition.
Fatigue.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So you're fringing plus Londoning and musing and tweeting and doing all this sort of stuff at the moment?
Yeah. So I've got the Titania McGrath show is on during the Fringe at the moment, but I'm not there most of the time. But I've got my own stand-up show which starts on Monday.
Right. And you've got to look after yourself and look after her and then somehow look after your online personas as well.
Yeah, I'm sort of juggling a few things, you know.
Yeah,
you know, it's like, we're all busy. Everyone's busy.
Not everyone's quite as busy as you. But yeah,
well, no, it's not about that.
I know. So, can you explain why we're sat here talking about a fictional female character and you juggling Twitter accounts?
Because you invited me, which is very nice. But also because, well, in other words, how have I ended up doing this as a job?
Yeah.
I do ask myself that question. I started the character last April, so sort of about 15 months ago or something, and more just for my own entertainment, and I wanted to sort of annoy some people on Twitter, basically, and
without it being you.
Without it being me, yeah. I was interested. I love the idea of inhabiting a persona. I always like being behind someone else. Mm-hmm. I don't like. Like even with the stand up I do, it's a character really. It's not really me. So I like the idea of that distance that you get. But I also thought I was a big fan of like the satirical accounts on Twitter that the personas, you know, people like the Godfrey Elphick account, and things like that. And I was really into the idea. So I thought I'd do it myself. And I spoke to Lisa Graves, who co-wrote the Godfrey Elphick account about it. She's based quite near here. She's based in Hull, actually. Okay. And I spoke to her about her work with the Godfrey Elphick thing. And I said, I've always wanted to do this. And she said, you should just do it. And encouraged me to do it. She even created the picture for me.
Did she?
Yeah. And nice. And then so I just went with it.
When did you start the account?
April. Yeah.
April this year.
April last year.
2018.
Yeah.
So it's like 18.
And then she got banned so often early on. Like my whole point of it was that I was just like, first I decided she was going to be a slam poet. She was going to be intersectional feminist, all of that stuff. Yeah. She was going to be massively contradictory, but just completely offended by absolutely everything. Really privileged, really obviously privileged, but not recognizing her own privilege because she wanted to be a victim. So all the kind of stuff that we recognize. And then I also made that decision early on. I wasn't going to self-censor at all. I think one of the real problems with comedy at the moment is people are hedging their bets. They're worried about what they're saying because they want to be successful. That makes complete sense. I thought, well, I'm not. No one knows this is me. I can say anything. Some of the early tweets were really vile, actually, and were really just sometimes just provocative for its own sake.
Yeah.
And you won't see them anymore because I had to delete them all.
Oh no!
But what would happen is I got a couple of 1-day bans, then I got a 7-day ban, then I got another 7-day ban. And I thought, well, and then at one point, it must have been around September, something like that. I don't know. She got a permanent ban. So Twitter said, they emailed saying, you are permanently suspended. You can't come back. And then there was a big uproar on Twitter, all these sort of prominent people complaining to Twitter.
Yeah.
And then Twitter brought her back again.
Because there's a provision on Twitter for satirical accounts.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Like a protection kind of thing. As long as it's apparent that it is, you can kind of get away with more.
Right. So their rule is if you've got a parody account, which is a specific mocking of another person, you have to put parody in your bio.
Okay.
This isn't a parody account; it's a satire account. I'm not parodying a particular person.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting.
So and people often don't understand that difference between satire and parody. So it's a different thing. But there is provision that Twitter ostensibly in their rules say that's okay. You should be allowed to do that. But they found some of the language and some of the imagery, I suppose, a bit unpleasant, and then completely banned her. Or they took it literally. I don't know.
Can you remember what the tweet was that was the full ban?
The full ban was she was saying that she was going to a UKIP march to punch people in the name of tolerance. And that was all it was. And I imagine that was probably just incitement to violence, maybe? I guess
so, yeah. Didn't you incite violence against yourself last night?
Yeah, I did. Are you following me on Twitter then? Wow. Yeah, I did, because I can't remember what I did now. I was drunk. What was it?
So, I'll tell you.
Okay.
The Titania account retweeted your show flyer.
That's it.
And said, this imposter is doing a show in the same place as me immediately after me at Edinburgh. Go see it. Bring milkshakes.
Ah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Of course it did.
And then you tweeted that saying, can I incite violence against myself?
Yeah. And then she replied to that.
I didn't see that one.
Oh, yeah.
I was asleep.
I
think you probably should have been asleep.
I started having a conversation with myself.
We all do that, Andrew. It's fine.
I know. I did that at the time before people knew it was me. I had
Would you call her out about...
No, she called me out on something. So I was on Sky News and I put out a clip of it, and she quote tweeted it saying, look at this disgusting straight white male doing this thing. And then I argued back and I pretended that I didn't realise it was satire.
Okay, so as if it was a real person.
I argued back saying, oh, look, this is really out of order. And then loads of people started going to me saying, this is satire, mate. I can't believe you fell for it. You idiot. You utter dickhead. It was really funny. And I kept saying, well, it wasn't obviously a joke. And so I argued back at them. I was just having
many layers.
It was just fun.
That are being built in here. So when it was very, very first new, did you find it quite cathartic?
Yeah,
having that outlet.
Exactly. I just said whatever I want. I still do. This is the problem, is that I haven't learnt my lesson really. I just say whatever I want now. The difference is now, if I offend people, they come at me.
Deal with the consequences.
Yeah, so they all come at me, and I get the sort of dogpiling on Twitter, which I didn't have before because people didn't know who it was.
Lovely anonymity previously.
Yeah. So I would have preferred to still be anonymous, to be honest.
So how did we get from you being this woke social justice warrior alter ego person to you now being both Bruce Wayne and Batman and everyone knowing the truth?
That was okay. So it's a bit of a complicated one. The book came out in March.
Woke link will be in the show notes below.
Yeah, please buy that. It's the only reason I'm here. And the book came out in March, and then Rosamund Irwin from the Sunday Times wrote an article in the Sunday Times. And what she did, it was actually a really impressive piece of investigative journalism. What she'd done is she'd read my book, she'd read my articles for Spiked Online. She'd worked out that there were some quotations that were similar and some thematic similarities. And then she decided, she said, I'm 50% certain it's Andrew Doyle, or it could be Lisa Graves, who ran the Godfrey Elfwick account. And there was a picture of me and there was a picture of Lisa. So she pretty much narrowed it down to two. Lisa had also painted the portrait of Titania that appears on the book inside cover, but she's credited. So Rosamund Irwin was saying, this seems a bit obvious if she's named. So it was a really good piece of journalism. She'd phoned friends of mine. I found out about this afterwards. She'd
Motherfucker.
I know. It's proper journalism, isn't it?
That's like forensic literary assessment
of a Twitter character. It's quite funny. And then
Unbelievable.
Good for her, honestly. And then, but the smoking gun came because Chortle, Steve Bennett at Chortle, I don't know how he did it. There was a catalogue at a book fair in Frankfurt, which had been issued by the publishers, and someone in the publishing house hadn't realised that I was to remain anonymous and put my name next to the book. But this was dating months before the book was released, so I don't know. I don't know to this day how he got it. I don't, but I must ask him one day. I think it's really interesting.
It's really impressive.
It's impressive.
What was it? So there must have been a day or a moment when you woke up and went, fuck, the game's up.
Well, yeah. Well, when I read the Sunday Times thing, I thought it'd be quite funny. I interviewed Lisa Graves, accusing her of being Titania McGrath as myself.
You sold them a dummy.
So then I published that interview. But I never denied it was me. I was very careful with my wording. I've never denied it. I didn't even deny it to Rosamund Unwin from the Times. I, you know, there was something about the phrasing when she emailed me and I emailed back. I made sure
very particular
that I wasn't lying.
Yeah.
And then, but then when the chortle thing came out, I thought, well, because I'd already turned down. I'd been offered interviews and things. They'd gone to the PR person at the publisher saying, could we interview whoever is behind Titania as him or her?
Yeah.
And I refused those. And then, so when this came out, I thought I may as well do all these interviews now.
Just double down on it.
And that's when I did the Piers Morgan stuff and all the interviews and things. Because actually, it happened the week the book was out. It really boosted it. It was hugely helpful to the extent that it looks like I calculated the whole thing. But I'm not that Machiavellian. I did, like, things just happen like that.
Yeah, they do. You know? Serendipity works weirdly like that.
Yeah.
So let's say that someone hasn't seen the Titania account.
Okay.
How would you describe it?
I would describe it as the kind of social justice activist who is very humorless, is desperate to be offended, desperate to promote her own victimhood, and is not necessarily stupid, but has swallowed this ideology wholesale to the extent that they stop being able to think for themselves. And it's like any ideology, isn't it? If you just follow an ideology without questioning any of its tenets, you end up basically mindless. You end up just like a zombie, like a kind of religious zealot. And that's what I wanted to. So I'm not saying a lot of the smartest people I know have bought into this cult of identity politics, and they end up saying really, really stupid things. I saw it the other day. Actually, I was reading the New Yorker review of the new Quentin Tarantino film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it's a guy in the New Yorker who is obviously extremely bright, obviously. But in the review, he says genuinely stupid things because he's seeing it through the prism of identity politics. He actually says at one point, it's a ridiculously white film, which is not a serious criticism you can level at a film. You know, it's really dumb. They did it with Dunkirk when Dunkirk came out, the Christopher Nolan film, and more than one critic, three or four, made the point that, the representation of people of colour, there's not sufficient representation. It's like, if that's all you can do, if you watch that film and that's all you come out with, how many boxes is it ticking?
Yeah.
You know, if that's all you can come up with, then to be honest, you're not really a critic at all.
No.
You're just an ideologue. You know, artists don't make choices on the basis of representation and what they feel they're feeding out to society in that way. Real artists don't.
Yeah.
They care about the work and the integrity of the work. And also this latest film by Tarantino, so much of the coverage has been his treatment of women. You know, the fact that Sharon Tate in the film doesn't speak very often. This is the man who produced Death Proof, which is an overtly feminist film as far as I can see. Kill Bill, both parts. Jackie Brown, which is his best film, which is an incredible characterization of this older middle-aged black woman in America. Pam Grier is fantastic in that film, and he sort of brought her back to the public consciousness. The idea that he's not great at the representation of women is absurd, actually. I think part of it is it started with The Hateful Eight, didn't it? Because there was the treatment of the Daisy Domergue character was so violent that she'd be continually punched. But he hates all his characters. Mark Commode pointed this out. He has complete contempt for all of his characters. He doesn't care about them.
No one has care for them. You're totally right.
So, like, why are we seeing artworks through? It just means you're not judging things on their own merits anymore. And it's a real shame, actually.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that's interesting, so for me, I'm not massively political. I'm a red-blooded capitalist and have worked for myself as a sovereign individual since I was like 18.
Okay.
So my exposure to the world of politics is very, very focused on myself.
Yeah.
My vote, if I was to vote, which I haven't I've never voted once.
Really?
No, never once. As an educated guy. I've always been away on holiday or busy with work or doing whatever it is. But if I was to vote, one of the first things that would come up would be, how does this affect my interests?
Okay.
And there was
You're a capitalist. Fine. Yeah. So you are political.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe. You tweeted an article, which I read earlier on, which has really broken down a lot of the things I wish that I could understand. Bridget Fetisi.
Yeah.
And it's called The Battle Cry of the Politically Homeless. And what she says is that people who don't have extremist views on either sides of the spectrum, or people who just aren't bothered about politics, kind of get lambasted as being these wasteful, what is it, a conservative? And a waste of a vote. And then on top of that, anyone who is moderate, anyone who has a slightly nuanced view, just gets sort of thrown to the wayside. And I think that with Titania, what you're identifying is that the people who are at the absolute extremes, it is funny for that reason, that people can identify, most people, the vast majority of people, can't identify with them at all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the, I only read that article this morning. I think it's a great article.
Amazing.
She's brilliant. She's an American comic who has had a lot of flack for just being honest about her opinions. And her opinions, as far as I can see, are not particularly controversial, Nevertheless, she's talking about that idea that there's an expectation now that you should be politicized. Taylor Swift got, do you remember she got so much flack for not condemning Trump? And it's like Taylor Swift's silence is deafening. It's like, I don't need to know Taylor Swift's opinion on politics,
I'm not
frankly.
turning to Taylor Swift for political advice.
It's like when Little Mix tweeted about the bombing of Syria. They sent an apology saying we're so sorry to the people of Syria. I bet the people of Syria were thinking, great, thank God, at least Little Mix have got our back. Well, I don't give look, I'm not saying these people shouldn't have the right to have an opinion. Of course they do, but I don't give a shit what Little Mix think about Syria.
Yeah,
that's not their expertise, is it?
No, not at all.
So anyway, so there's this expectation, but also what Bridget's talking about in that article is the way in which, actually, because if you express an honest opinion and then you get this kind of barrage of hatred off the back of it, it means that people are becoming nervous about just being honest. So the discourse is dominated by the extremes. So you have the woke left who are really myopic and just cannot see beyond their own very narrow sort of parameters. And if you step outside that, particularly if you come from the left like I do, and you step outside it just a little bit, you're the persona non grata. You're the one they attack.
Pushed straight down the hill.
Yeah. And so people who have moderate views, people who just want to have a discussion about some of these difficult issues, they want to address the nuance of, say, the trans debate, they will just be lambasted as bigots. Because the big irony of this is these people don't know what the word bigot means. I mean, the definition of bigot is someone who is incapable or completely intolerant of anyone else's opinion, someone who has a different opinion. But so 9 times out of 10, anyone who calls you a bigot is normally the bigot. Because what they're saying is your opinion shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah.
It shouldn't, it shouldn't be tolerated. So, yeah, it's a real problem. Bridget's been on the receiving end of it. A lot of us have now. And of course, what happens as well is if you express an opinion that isn't within that Overton window of acceptable thought, people just say, well, you're being dishonest. You're being a provocateur. You're being a shock jock. Because it's a kind of narcissistic worldview that I can't believe that someone else would have a different view than me. Therefore, this must be a lie.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I suppose my guiding principle, is just to tell the truth, say what I think.
Yes.
And see what happens. Right. And if everyone did that, can you imagine? We'd be in a much better position, wouldn't we?
Yeah. Well, Jordan Peterson, who is a fan favourite of the show, his first rule, tell the truth. Or at least do not lie.
He makes the point in his book about this, actually, that it's actually very self-destructive to be dishonest. And when I read that, it really chimed with me. I think that's absolutely right. You're hurting yourself if you're dishonest. And he also makes the point that absolutely there are times when lying is actually the compassionate thing to do, right? Fine. But actually there's a way to do just evading the truth. As in, you don't have to...
Lies of omission, not lies of commission.
Yeah. If it's for a compassionate reason, that makes sense to me. But I think when it comes to just expressing your opinions and views, it's all about respecting people enough to tell them the truth. As in, I can respect you. I can say something that I think you might disagree with because I respect you enough as a human being that I assume you're not going to start throwing things and call me a Nazi, right? You're going to have a debate and you're going to have a discussion.
Yeah.
It's actually really disrespectful to say what you think the popular viewpoint is, just for the sake of other people's, sensibilities. That's actually very disrespectful to them because you're patronizing them. You're infantilizing them. You're saying that you wouldn't be able to cope with dissent. It's a bit like being at school. When you're at school, like it's a particular thing with boys at school is that you won't say an opinion unless you're sure everyone else agrees, right?
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes you're this happened to me all the time. You must have happened to you. Like when you were a kid and someone said something and everyone was like, "Oh no, we don't think that, do we?" Yeah. No. And then it's like, "Oh no, I didn't mean that." I actually saw a stand-up doing a bit about this year where he's talking about when a situation arises in the news and he offers an opinion a bit too early when it's not formed, and then he's like, "Oh no, can I take that back?" Right, and which is what teenagers do. This isn't a teenage act, by the way, but that's what teenagers do, and it's that thing of, well, actually, we'd all be better off being honest. We'd know who we were voting for. We'd know what people think, and we'd know where we stand. We'd have our views challenged. There's all sorts of reasons why honesty is a good thing. But no matter how many times I say that, it doesn't matter. People just say, "Yeah, you're lying. You're just lying because you want to cause trouble or whatever," and that's really sad.
I know. Anyone who wants to read a very good short book online, Sam Harris's Lying, 1 hour.
Okay,
1 hour read. And it is a 1 hour justification for why you should never lie.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely great. Highly, highly recommended. Will be linked in the show notes below.
But I get it. I keep getting messages from people saying, "I really like what you're doing. I can't tweet about it." Honestly, I had one the other day from quite a prominent actor saying, "I really, really like," he saw the show actually, said, "I really like the Titania show. I can't tweet about it because I can't be bothered with the backlash. I don't want to face the backlash." So I sympathise with that. Why should there be a backlash for expressing an opinion?
Well, Bridget mentions in the article, which is the best way I've seen to put it, that people aren't voting out of habit or for their own interests. It's now a comment on your personal identity and worth.
Quite. So let's take the Brexit vote, where the media reduced it to leave equals bad, remain equals good. Not just the media, but sort of the people in the sort of very middle class circles. That's how they reduced it. Leave equals racist, remain equals
compassionate.
Yeah, and non-racist. Yeah. Okay, it's a lie that everyone bought into. It's pathetic. And it's
we still left.
Well, we haven't left. Well, it's that reductive thing of reducing actually a very complicated, nuanced political question to an easy shortcut. You know,
why do you think that people are doing that at the moment? Why are people reducing down difficult discussions to these real tweet length?
There's a good psychological reason. There's a thing called the cognitive miser model, which means that you instinctively try and find the easiest train of thought. Your mind, that you'll always go for the easiest. It actually takes a bit of effort to think about things. If you've got this situation, for instance, with the Brexit vote, and you can just say, well, that side's good and that side's evil, well, it's easy. It's an easy choice to make. Otherwise, you have to start understanding the issues. It's a whole lot harder. I get that. And it's happening a lot. It happened with Trump. It's happening now with Boris Johnson. So there's going to be, it's the same thing again. It's, are you a good person? And this is why the polls never work anymore. This is why no one predicted Trump. No one predicted Brexit. It never works because people have their opinions. They have two sets of opinions. They've got the opinions that they actually feel, and they've got the opinions that they know they can express in public. Right? And those two are no longer the same. Yes. It used to be the case that they were the same. I remember talking to an old trade unionist about this. He was saying that, we used to be able to talk to like some of the miners and everything and they would be really homophobic. They'd say like, they hate fags and all this sort of, they wouldn't use fags. They'd say queers back then when they were faggots. But they were right on all these other issues. And rather than balk at that and say, oh, well, you're obviously a fascist, I won't talk to you about anything. This guy was saying, well, what I'd say to them is, well, okay, you're right about these social issues and these economic issues. So can we now talk about your issues about sexuality? And then it became a discussion, and then people changed their minds. And that's a great thing to happen, right? But now, if, say, for instance, you've got one opinion that is not acceptable, say you are anti-abortion, right? So that, for many leftists, is like one of the sins.
Cardinal sins.
Right? So if you're in that, then suddenly we write you off completely.
Yeah.
So even if we agree on other things, it doesn't matter anymore. You're now the bad person. You're now an evil person. It's really unsophisticated.
Yeah, it is.
And it's perfectly, this is why I end up agreeing with people who, on the whole, I don't agree on anything. And for instance, let's take the free speech question, So I am not a nationalist. I would never vote UKIP on the basis that it's a nationalist party and I'm not nationalist. So fundamentally, I don't have anything in common with them. But they're right about free speech. Right, so they recognise that there's a problem with free speech. The Labour Party and the Tory Party are both against free speech. Both of them are for hate speech laws, for instance. The Labour Party want to push more press regulation, if at all possible. Theresa May is one of the worst when it comes to free speech. I mean, she She denied Tyler the Creator entrance to the UK on the basis of a rap he'd done, right? Which was great because then he did an anti-Theresa May rap, which sounds really surreal. People forget about that, but that did actually happen. I didn't dream that. So when you've got the two major parties who are anti-free speech, you've got to be able to say, this other party that I have nothing in common with, that actually I can't really stand, they are right about that. But you say that, and then all of a sudden, oh, you're a UKIP supporter. No, I'm not. I haven't voted for
like
them, never
this
would.
Tiny little sliver.
They're correct about that.
Of what they're saying. And
no one gets to own principles, right? So a principle is either right or it's wrong. Mm-hmm. Okay? So you should be able to say, I don't approve of anything that person says or does, but on that they're right. Because they don't own the principle.
There's no more room for nuance or subtlety in discussions now. So the thing that keeps coming back to me, and again, I'm probably a good avatar for the layperson when it comes to seeing these things, right? Because I'm not embroiled in them, and it's
good for you.
I know, it must feel like it would be heaven for you, right? Looking from the outside in, people who are getting upset at the fact that you're making comedy at these situations, to me, that is potentially the most shocking thing of all, because Armando Iannucci must be itching at his script to have a go at Brexit and Boris Johnson with another season of The Thick of It, and there must be, I
think he said he could never do The Thick of It again. There was an article a couple of years ago because he says things have got too surreal.
Well, there we go. But you know what I mean? Like, to me, it looks like the perfect breeding ground. The current political climate is the perfect breeding ground for some comedy and some satire.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. It's ideal. People often say that to me, like, isn't it hard to satirize? Like people like Trump, who is self-satirizing. The funniest thing said about Trump are by himself, right? They're on his Twitter feed.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, I mean, 2 days ago with Tlaib, you know, the thing about Rashida Tlaib, sorry, I'm talking politics again, but she'd asked to go to Israel to visit her 90-year-old grandmother on humanitarian grounds, and Israel had denied her entry because she was likely to criticize the Israeli government. And she said in a letter, I won't criticize you. I just want to see my grandmother. They came back saying, okay. And then she was like, oh, this is disgusting. I'm not going there because they're demanding that I say certain things. It was a total political move. But then Trump tweeted about it saying, well, the only winner in this situation is her grandmother who won't have to see it. Let's be honest, that's a funny tweet. Now, look, I don't support Trump, and I'm also I'm old-fashioned about politics. I don't want my politicians to be funny.
Yeah.
I want them to be serious because it's a serious job.
Yeah.
But I can look at that and say that's funny. I can look at that and say that's a funny tweet. He has a point, even though I don't like most of what he stands for.
Wish I'd written it.
Yeah, there we go. That's not that good.
Yeah.
But it's funnier because it's the president.
Yeah.
There is something funny about the idea of the president of the United States calling Kim Jong-un fat. That's funny because it should never happen. It's also scary because they're both nuclear powers. You know, so the stakes are pretty high.
Both of them have got a button.
Yeah, stakes are pretty high there. So again, I should reiterate, I'm not supportive of it. I wish he didn't do it.
Yeah.
But I also look at it and laugh. What are you going to do? Laughter's an involuntary response, isn't it? I don't calculate like the woke set seem to be able to do.
Yeah.
I mean, the woke idea is that you hear a joke, you think about it, you assess who are the marginalized groups. Is it punching up? Is it punching down? Can I laugh at that? Yes, good. Emit laughter. They see it as this kind of transaction, right? That's not how it works. Sometimes I laugh at the most horrible, inappropriate things because they are horrible and inappropriate. Because that sort of stuff reminds us why we don't talk about those things. You go and see a Jerry Sadowitz show, you know, and good luck watching a Jerry Sadowitz show and not being offended at some point.
Yeah, everyone's going to get offended.
He's going to offend you at some point. There's going to be a moment where you think, that's too much. You shouldn't do that. And there's something quite exhilarating about that.
Yeah.
You know? You can be offended and laugh at it. Happens to me all the time. I'm quite sensitive. I get offended really easily. But it's my problem. It's basically.
Yeah, that's funny. One of the things that I've been thinking about when seeing the way that we recently had Zuby on the show.
Yeah.
Because of this weird gameplay that the left's done with language and social constructs and things like that.
Yeah.
To me, what it appears to have allowed are very clever people to game that system.
Right.
And Zuby's tweet about breaking the woman's deadlift record, P.S. I identified as a woman, don't be a bigot.
Yeah.
That is a perfect example of regaming the little gaps that have been created by the left in that.
Yeah.
Is that one of the things that you think that helping us to identify where there's inconsistencies within their views and stuff like that.
I think ridicule is what does it best of all. And part of the way you do that is you take on board their language. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is you find yourself tempted to play them by their rules. So when they talk about privilege and all of that, I've seen this happen a lot. When there's an argument about privilege, and they often throw out this idea of white privilege, this blanket idea that if you're white, you are inherently privileged, which of course is not true. Some white people are privileged, some aren't, right? In all sorts of ways. There's all kinds of ways you can be privileged, right? It's not just to do with race, ethnicity, and sexuality. But yeah, so you end up with the situation where people buy into the victimhood thing, and they'll say, okay, I've been accused of being privileged, so how can I come back and say, actually, no, I went to a rough school, grew up on an estate, I did, right. And then you're getting into this competition, you're playing their rules back at them, and that's probably not healthy, you know? You can do it, like, you can, and when they fall foul of their own rules, which they often do, right? Did you see the Democrat conference in America where someone made a point of personal privilege, yeah?
Yeah.
And the point of personal privilege was, guys, can you just keep the noise down because I'm very sensitive, I get sensory overload and I get triggered. Then someone said, point of personal privilege about that point of personal privilege. Don't say guys, that's gendered language, I'm really offended by that, don't do that. So you have people calling out each other's calling out. It's like this endless inception of wokeness.
Yeah.
Right? So we could do that too. So we could point out where they are being triggering. I mean, let's take an example. Most of the woke lot who are really anti-Brexit tend to be incredibly ageist. They're basically saying, we can't wait for the old people to die. Old people have fucked over the country. They're basically evil. It's like, are you kidding? You're the person who goes on all the time about being sensitive and surely what ageism is part of that, isn't it? Or is that just your blind spot? So then if we call them out for ageism, we become part of that game.
Yeah.
So I sort of refuse to play the game.
So that's something that I've got written down here as something that I totally can't work out, but you're going to help me do it.
Okay.
You may have been in a relationship, but a lot of listeners will have been, where your partner brings up a particular issue. You don't care about this issue.
Okay.
That you spoke to that girl, or you didn't reply in time, or you were late, or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's not an issue that you usually would do. But they set a precedent by doing that.
Yeah.
And then what you find yourself doing next time that something happens that you find them culpable for that same thing for, is you go, hang on a second, are you talking to that guy?
Yeah.
I didn't care, and I still don't care, but I'm going to use the opportunity to identify your inconsistency.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Straight off the bat.
Yeah.
And that push and pull that happens in relationships, I think, is very similar to what's happening here.
Yeah.
And I almost think that looking at the way that the left has kind of adopted this, the way that Andy Ngo was assaulted in the street and they're taking bike lots around and throwing milkshakes at people, that would have been a characteristic of the right previously.
Oh, absolutely.
A very aggressive approach.
Right.
And it's almost like they're absorbing, taking on that persona, that push and pull thing. And then you think, well, hang on a second, if you keep on doing that as the left and throwing bike locks around, there are some people on the right who have got very, very large guns.
Right, exactly. Well, there's two sort of points there. I think one of them is well, actually, not just the left that do it. Of course, the right do it as well. We saw that with the Joe Brand case. When Joe Brand made the joke about throwing battery acid at Nigel Farage, which was obviously a joke, whether you found it funny or not, that's irrelevant. But it was mostly people on the right saying she should be arrested or she should be investigated by the police. All the same people who complain about the very authoritarian treatment of comedy on the whole, right? And people who say that free speech is under threat. And then all of a sudden they're the people saying, actually, no, but Joe Brand should be investigated because that's the inciting violence. No, you've got to be consistent in your principles, either left or right. That's really, really important because it means your own principles will get undermined. But the other point about Antifa, which the group, the anti-fascist group. Now, I, for one, mistrust anyone who identifies as anti-fascist. Let me just say that. Because for a start, I assume everyone is, right? My assumption of you will be that you're not a fascist. Yeah? It's a fair assumption, right?
Yeah.
Okay? I will assume that of everyone until I hear extraordinary evidence to the contrary. If I find the evidence, fine.
Yeah.
But we have to, because there's hardly any fascists out there.
It's like being an anti-dog shagger.
Yeah, exactly. You don't declare that, do you?
Yeah.
You don't declare that you don't have a predilection to penetrate livestock, do you? Do you? I don't know. No. And I wouldn't assume that you would have.
Yeah.
Although now we're talking about my suspicions. No, you see, but look, and I see it on Twitter all the time, proud anti-fascist. Like, you don't need to tell me that. And it makes me suspicious, right?
What you're projecting about.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same as the people who there's a statistic somewhere that Yusuf, one of the co-hosts of the show's put out.
Yeah.
People that are very, very sort of vitriolic about being against gays are the ones that are most aroused when they see.
Yeah, there's been studies into that. Yeah. There's been studies. I mean, they literally measured the extent of people's arousal.
Yeah.
You know, to like how hard they got, basically. Yeah. And it tended to be when the most overtly homophobic people watched gay porn. But it's such a no-brainer. Of course it is. Because why would you care?
Yeah.
Why would you care who people
Unless
have sex with?
there's something lurking in the back of.
Yeah, it's you know, the data's in on that one, and it's not surprising. But the point about Antifa, Antifa effectively end up behaving like fascists, don't they? They end up behaving like
that's the thing that's so funny about it.
Yeah, like anyone who seeks to silence someone through violence is at the very least employing a tactic that the fascists also employed. So, you know, I'd probably stop short of calling them actual fascists. I think fascists has a very specific historical meaning, but there are certainly fascistic tendencies or strategies. I mean, I read Mark Bray's book about Antifa, and what's very interesting, it's very well written, actually. What's interesting about it is he does a very good job of sort of outlining all the history of the anti-fascist movements. Things like Cable Street, you know, where the people confronted the Oswald Mosley's brown shirts. So all of that, and that's very good. There's a lot of that stuff I didn't know about. It's all very interesting. But of course, those are genuine anti-fascist movements. You know, these are
not the kiddies version,
right? Exactly. So what the book fails to do, quite spectacularly actually, is connect those movements to what is happening now, and makes the assumption that the people we're dealing with are in fact fascists. That assumption is wrong. Okay, so some of them are fascists, some of them are white supremacists, sure. Right? Most of them aren't. You see Trump supporters getting pepper sprayed. Anyone wearing a MAGA hat getting kicked to the ground.
There was someone who had a "Make Bitcoin Great Again" hat that got
really just because they didn't read it properly.
Yeah, they couldn't read the word Bitcoin instead of.
Now, if you can't distinguish between an actual white supremacist and someone who votes Trump, and that isn't to say that white supremacists couldn't vote Trump. They could, and they might do. But just because you vote Trump, it doesn't follow that you're a white supremacist. That will still be a massive minority of the people who voted for Trump. Right? So if you can't make that distinction, then you are politically and historically illiterate. And what's worse is if you can't make that distinction and you have that level of illiteracy and you've got a baseball bat and a mask, that's a dangerous combination, right?
Totally right.
You know, I mean, we saw with Andy Ngo, a bunch of white middle-class students in masks beating up a gay Vietnamese immigrant in the name of tolerance and to stand up against white supremacy. Are you joking?
It's a Titania tweet.
So it's really funny and also horrible.
Yeah.
It's horrible because...
Sorry, Andy.
He was hurt. He was injured. It was unjust. What they should have done... Now, obviously, all this stems from an article he wrote, or a couple of articles he wrote for Quillette. What you do in that case, if you disagree with the journalist, is you go up to them and say, "Oh, I disagree with this. Can we have a discussion about it?" That's it. And as soon as you hit someone on the basis of they are normalizing supremacist language or discourse, you over theorize to justify your own violent acts, and it can't be justified. And it's really, really sad that we've got to this point where this is happening.
Is all of this just reaction? Is it still this big hangover from Trump being elected?
Partly. I mean, I'm sure there's a frustration about it. Trump, I suppose, was the start of it, wasn't it? And because people just decided that he was a fascist because they didn't really know what fascist meant. He said a lot of stuff that I find contemptible, and a lot of stuff that I think you would be hard pushed. I think when he talked about Ilhan Omar and the squad, and said send them home, or they should just go home. I mean, 3 of the 4 were born in America. They were born in America, and the 4th is a US citizen anyway, right? It's difficult for me to see how that can be interpreted as anything other than a racist trope, actually. But this does not necessarily mean he's a white supremacist. That's a massive leap to make. Again, I'd need the evidence on it. But yeah, I think that's the problem, is that there's a sense of frustration. People were angry, understandably so. It's not nice to lose, is it? And it's easier if you can then paint everyone who made that thing happen as evil. If you say that everyone who voted for Trump is as deplorable as Hillary Clinton so memorably did, and that worked out really well for her, didn't it? Then of course you go on the offensive and you end up guaranteeing Trump's victory in 2020. That's what you do. That's what they've done.
What would you predict?
Well, he's definitely going to win.
You reckon?
Yeah, I mean, he's playing a very smart game because he's putting the squad, the 4 Democrat politicians who play identity politics all the time. So Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley and Rashida Tlaib, who are never going to play well with the electorate because they're always going on about grievance and intersectionality and white privilege and all that sort of stuff. That doesn't win votes. Never has, never will. And what Trump is doing is he constantly talks about them to make them the face of the Democrat Party. So people like Nancy Pelosi,
giving them enough rope.
Yeah. People like Pelosi are hating this. Like she wants to distance herself from these four. But when you think Democrat, now you think uber woke, crazy identitarians, right? And that's largely because of Trump and because of the way he puts them at the center. So it's a smart, tactical move. The Democrats need to distance themselves from this kind of politics. Identity politics never works. And what's so funny about it...
Why doesn't it work?
Because it divides everyone up. It says, you stay in your lane over here, you stay in your lane, we're going to really help you, we'll help the Hispanics, we'll help the gays, we'll help the women, and everyone else is like, what about us? What about us? And then it becomes competing interests. You can only win an election by unity, by saying that we are doing what's best for absolutely everyone. And because the woke movement is essentially a movement that rehabilitates racial thinking, it makes us think about race more, it makes us think about sexuality, and it makes us aware to the point of discrimination, and it separates us all out. And it wants to undo the work of the civil rights movements. It wants to undo the work of Martin Luther King. It wants us no longer to think about content of character, but to think about color of skin. So it's a regressive, backward movement. It isn't helpful for human rights. It feeds the far right. It helps the far right. The far right is on the rise. They're still thankfully a very fringe group, but they are on the rise because of the woke movement, because of the woke left giving them all the ammunition they need. Okay? Because if you constantly say that all these working class white people, you're just privileged, all you boys, you're just rapists in waiting, you've got toxic masculinity, you should be ashamed of yourself, all of this sort of stuff. And then you've got the alt-right, white nationalist group saying, well, come to us then. We're not going to treat you like that.
It becomes an almost moderate and attractive place to be.
Exactly. And that's a really terrifying prospect for me. The main reason I attack the woke left is because I'm scared of the rise of the far right. That genuinely frightens me. Because whereas the woke left are well-intentioned, on the whole, I think they're well-intentioned. They want the world to get a place. They're just in a cult, so they can't see the reality of it, right? It's like anyone in a cult, they believe it, right? It's not evil. They see the world as full of fascists. They see the world as full of injustice, and they want to do something about it. That's a laudable aim. The problem is the world isn't full of fascists, and they just end up hitting people with bike locks because they vote the wrong way, right? So that's the problem. And what all of that does is generate all of this resentment, and it's a gift, it's a boon to the genuine, like, really vile white supremacist alt-right, just repugnant people who can thrive on this stuff. That's, as far as I can see, the only way to get beyond that is to take down the woke left, to make it okay to mock them again, to restore reasonable political conversation. That's what we need to do. It's so important.
There must be. So there's a really interesting podcast, Eric Weinstein on Joe Rogan.
Okay.
And I've
seen Joe Rogan's podcast a lot, but I haven't seen that.
So Eric is the managing director of Thiel Capital, Peter Thiel, one of the PayPal mafia's companies, and he is fairly widely regarded as one of the smartest people, like public intellectuals on the planet. And he has this really interesting point he makes about how the moderates on both the left and the right are allowing the extremists of that side to do all of the work for them.
Yeah, exactly.
And that by not shouting up as someone who's moderate left and saying, hang on a second, that's wrong. Or by being moderate right and saying, hang on a second, that's also wrong. Like Charlottesville's wrong. Yeah. Whatever it might be. You are, he says it with much more nuance than this, but he says essentially you're supporting it by saying, oh, well, you can go out as the vanguard of your particular political leaning.
Yeah.
Push them forward a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you can't shout louder than the lunatics, can you? They do dominate. They really do. That's a very good. I think, for instance, in the case of Charlottesville, it is quite important for people on that side of the debate to say this is wrong. It's not right for Trump to suggest a moral equivalence between people who are opposed to fascism and people who murder in the name of white supremacy. That's not right. I mean, the anti-fascist peaceful protesters, I'm behind 100%. What I'm not behind is the ones who don the masks, commit acts of violence. That's a very different...
Drag an old man out of his car when they're trying to redirect him in traffic.
Right. That's a very different it's important because I think peaceful protest is the way all the time. Peaceful protest and ridicule. But yes, certainly. So sorry to go back to the point. Sorry, I've gone on a different.
The extremes pulling in for the moderate people.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to what Bridget was saying, doesn't it? Is that when a movement gets characterized by its worst elements, that's a problem. In the way that Islam, for instance, has been mischaracterized by its most reactionary elements.
100%.
You get the same thing here, where suddenly you think of the left. I mean, if I say the left, what do you think of? You think of these screeching offence seekers, don't you? Mm-hmm. You think of these
purple hair.
Yeah, you think of the worst. Well, actually, that's not what being on the left means. You know, and that's a real shame. So I think we need to restore moderation. I think we need to we need to stop having fealty to ideology so that we can say, broadly speaking, my principles are left wing. But that you've just said, this right winger has said this interesting thing, which I might take on board and actually I might adopt as well. Mm-hmm. And restore the nature of the individual. The individual is sovereign, as John Stuart Mill said. Like it matters what you think. You have to be a free thinker, not let other people do your thinking for you. And that's where we've got to, where people don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Like if you were on the left saying you told me one of your principles, I could pretty much guess what all your other views are. And that should never be the case. Mm-hmm. You should surprise me now and then with what you think.
Did you see Jordan Peterson on GQ?
No.
This interview is fantastic. I'll send you it for you.
Oh wait, with Helen Lewis?
Maybe.
It was a one-to-one interview, 2 hours long.
Yes, they tried to take me down. There was lots of opportunities to take me down. It's got a really weird title.
I totally did.
In that, she says, she starts asking him these questions and he just starts laughing at her.
Yeah.
And he says, because your questions are ridiculous. From the first question that you asked me, I could have predicted every subsequent question that you were going to give me.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's it playing out in front of us.
Yeah. Isn't that sad? And no one wants to be predictable anyway, you know?
No.
But
that's what the left are trying to do here.
Yeah.
They're trying to go with how much fidelity can I become offended?
Yeah.
With how high a resolution can I look at discrimination? And continue to one up. It's the point of personal privilege.
Yeah.
I get this. Oh, point of personal privilege. You've used the word, guys. It's the one-upmanship.
I mean, I'm always a bit wary of that just because I don't like to guess what people are thinking. I don't like to guess people's intentions, you know? So when we talk about virtue signaling, right, which is I think what you're referring to, it definitely goes on. You know, I mean, everyone knows this, so particularly politicians do this a lot, you know, they talk about, they want people to know how upset they are about a certain thing or whatever. But by the same token, I don't want to assume that they're doing that for the worst motives. I don't want to assume that about them, you know? But I don't know.
It's the problem of you having faith in people. It's a problem of you. It literally is the problem of you hoping for the best in people, and we do this all the time.
It's partly that, but it's also that I can't. It's that goes back to the thing about not playing by their rules, right? The thing that I get all the time is people telling me what I secretly think. That's the one common factor I get it all the time. So people will say,
"What do they say you think?"
Well, so actually, virtually all the major criticisms of me on Twitter, the people who really go for me. Have decided that I have these secret racist thoughts, that I have internalized homophobia, that I had one the other day about how I don't know. Who knows, right? All this stuff is you're a right wing, you're a Tory. I get that a lot, a Tory. I've never voted Tory. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They know that secretly I have. Mm-hmm. They know my secret thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a problem. And then if I turn around and say, but you secretly think this, then I'm just reducing myself to their level. So what I will always do is take an argument at face value. I'm never going to assume someone's lying about their argument for whatever reason, because the argument will be demolished irrespective of the truth behind it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, you can defeat a bad argument whether the person is sincere about it or not.
I understand.
So that I think is a much better strategy. And I'm sure there are people who are paid for extreme opinions, you know. I think we all know who we're talking about, right? People, you know, who will put extreme opinions out there because it gets them clickbait, you know. But the argument either stands or falls on its own merit. It doesn't really matter whether they mean it or not. Mm-hmm. And also, you can't demolish the argument by assuming they don't mean it, Because you've got no evidence for that.
Yeah.
That's just your speculation.
You've got to defeat it on its own terms.
Yeah.
Or on its merit. I'm going to bring up what I spoke to Zuby about the other day on the podcast, which is Mario Lopez, the guy who played AC Slater on Saved by the Bell, which you never watched. So
I never watched it.
It's a shame, man. Honestly, it's a good TV show.
Is it?
So Mario Lopez says this very, very over pedestrian, caveat after caveat, very, very mild. I'm not sure if 3-year-olds should be allowed to change their gender.
Yeah.
That's essentially what he says. And then is annihilated. And a couple of days later comes back with the most grovelling apology. Yeah. The comments I made were ignorant and insensitive, and I now have a deeper understanding of how hurtful they were. I have been and always will be an ardent supporter of the LGBTQ plus community, and I'm going to use this opportunity to better educate myself. Moving forward, I will be more informed and thoughtful.
Right. Well, every time someone does that, it gives more power to the woke movement, and it gives that sort of Twitter mob the upper hand, because they know it works. Mm-hmm. It's like capitulating to terrorists. Once you do it, they know it works, and they'll do it again and again and again. And we've seen it all the time. People are forced to apologize for things they said years ago, things that probably weren't even that offensive. Mm-hmm. That's not offensive. That's an opinion. Mm-hmm. So, and if he either he believed it or he didn't, right? If he believed it, stand by it.
Yeah.
It's sure you can change your mind about stuff
in 3 days.
Unlikely.
To that degree.
What you're actually having is a lot of pressure from, people can say to him, but maybe someone sat him down and said, oh, think about this. And he did change his mind. That's possible, right? Even in that case, I would advise not apologizing because it just feeds the beast.
Yeah.
We saw this with Kevin Hart and the Oscars for jokes he tweeted 10 years ago, something like that. Mm-hmm. And they were jokes. Doesn't matter if they're offensive. They were jokes. I don't care. Again, but good for him. He didn't apologize. He said, I apologized at the time. I'm not going to keep apologizing for this.
Yeah. Did you see the Liam Neeson thing about, was it in February time? Yeah. Where he said that his close family member had been sexually assaulted by a black guy. Yeah, so he walked around his hometown with a kosh.
Yeah.
Just going into black neighborhoods, hoping to find someone that was associated.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, hang on a second, what's this guy supposed to say? Because I found, although it's obviously quite a dark story, I found it very, very interesting. I was like, oh my gosh, this is how would I feel? What would I do in that situation? How would I act in that situation? You're thinking about Liam Neeson, this guy with his really gravelly voice, walking around the dark streets of Ireland with this kosh in his hand. And I'm like, what an amazing story. Yeah.
I can't believe he said it, actually. I can't believe he said that to a journalist.
Unbelievable.
And didn't think about the consequences of saying it. But there is something to be said for his honesty. But it's a horrible idea that someone can be so traumatized by something they behave in such a vile way. Mm-hmm. And by his own admission, it was a vile
but the shock, his own shock at himself.
Yeah.
But does that not, like, that sort of a thing educates everybody?
Yeah.
That sort of a story, because I'm like, I've never heard anything like that before.
Yeah.
Even in fiction, I've never heard anything like that before. And I think, wow.
But
what's really interesting.
What was weird about that is I don't know why the woke movement got so angry about that, because actually what he was making was a really woke point. Because they believe that white people are essentially racist anyway. And so this was just sort of bolstering their view. So I don't know why they weren't happy about this, to be honest. But yeah, they went for him. It's an unforgiving. I mean, this is the thing about the whole woke thing, is you can never, if you make a mistake once, you are tarred for life. You can never be forgiven. Because it is a religion and they don't think redemption is possible.
Well, that's why the Mario Lopez, you've got this window of whatever, like maybe 7 days or something like that, within which you can recant.
Right.
And as long as you do your self-flagellation over whatever particular TV station or press release it is that you do, then maybe you get...
Right, but and the point he was raising is a discussion we need to have, right? The question about gender is a discussion we absolutely need to have. Mm-hmm. So anyone who knows anything about gender and has read sort of theories of gender is not, as the woke movement claim, a social construct. It is a very, very complicated combination of social and biological factors. Right. And the problem is that their faith-based position about gender has been adopted, particularly in Canada, for instance, by governments. And actually, we need to have a much bigger discussion before these sort of policies are adopted. We need to actually talk about and decide whether they're right or not. It's not correct that gender is solely something to do with culture. Largely, I mean, certainly the obvious example is that you dress boys in blue and girls in pink, whereas in fact, go back 100, 200 years, it was the reverse, right? So those things are arbitrary. Feminism, second wave feminism, spent years trying to break down the idea of gender norms and gender stereotyping, right? What's wrong with a boy being effeminate? Why do you start questioning and saying, well, let's maybe he's a girl? No, maybe he's an effeminate boy, and that's okay. What's wrong with a girl being a tomboy, being butch? What? Do
you remember tomboys?
Yeah,
because tomboys haven't been around, as far as I can remember, for about 10 years.
Well, in fact, the recent play of the was it an Enid Blyton play? Was it Mallory Towers even? And they cast a non-binary actor to play the tomboy character.
Okay,
it was an Emma Rice production. No, this says a lot. That it's almost like the concept of a butch girl is now something we don't understand anymore. No, that's a boy in a girl's body. This is deeply conservative, right? It's hugely conservative. I saw a documentary about trans kids where the parents were talking about they said that we've got this little girl now and we're so happy because we don't have to watch our little boy mincing about basically like a little gay, right? So we fixed him. We fixed the problem,
You can't say that.
No, it's said, and without any sense of self-awareness, but actually that points to a very interesting thing about the trans debate, which we're not really addressing, is to what extent is this actually just a rehabilitated homophobia? To what extent is this just us fixing people into rigid ideas of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman? I remember seeing a debate between a performance artist called David Hoyle and Lauren Harries, who is a transgender woman, was formerly a man, was formerly male. And Lauren said, during the interview, she said, I always knew I was a woman because I used to buy lots of shoes, right? Which actually just is endorsing the most base, gross stereotype about women and commercialism that you can imagine. Women aren't all Imelda Marcos, they don't have... That's not what
walk-in wardrobes.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you're a woman just because you like to... I used to play with dolls as a kid. I'm not a woman.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. And so that's my big concern. That's what I would like to have. I'm not saying that I know all the answers or that I have a full understanding of the situation. What I am saying is I've read a lot about it and I would like to have a serious, proper public discussion about these issues without being shouted at and called a transphobe and have someone hit me with a bike lock and have a milkshake on my face.
Well, being able to, being under the age of 16 and not being allowed to have sex, but being allowed to change your sex.
Right. It's obviously a problem.
Because having sex will last for probably your first time, maybe about 3 minutes. But changing your sex is the rest of your life.
Right. It's a really serious, but I have
How's no one identifying this?
I have total sympathy with someone who genuinely feels that they are in the wrong body. Of course I do.
Yes.
So to suggest that to have misgivings about any kind of chemical intervention or puberty inhibiting of a child is not the same thing as being anti-trans rights. It should be, actually, the two are completely compatible. We need to have a serious discussion about that, right? But we're not having that discussion. We're just throwing insults. It's really sad.
I know. So I wanted to finish with some questions for Titania, as if, how would she answer?
Right.
So
That's really hard.
I know. You're gonna have to channel your...
Do you know, it's hard though, because normally when I think of an idea for a tweet, I go off and walk for like 15, 20 minutes and refine it.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Except for last night when I just did drunk and whatever.
Firing away. Well, anyway, let's see how we get on.
All right.
Number one.
I'm not an improviser.
Don't worry, that's fine. Number one, are all cats feminists?
Oh, cats feminists. She would suggest that feminism is the natural state. And therefore all animals are essentially feminist. She also believes that all animals are essentially vegan, but that they are socialized into believing that they should eat meat by our example. That's what she thinks. Amazing. But there's a line in the book where she talks about her vegan cat. And she says, she does chase birds around the garden, but I think she must assume there's some kind of flying vegetable or something. And it's that thing about she just projects her own ideas onto everyone else. But yeah, cats, because feminism is the natural state.
Cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of vegetables, which is the most oppressive vegetable?
I would say butternut squash.
Why?
I don't know.
I think courgette.
Really?
Yeah, because of that sort of French-sounding G, which is how it's spelled in bourgeois.
Actually, thinking about it, it's the aubergine. Because of the emoji.
Absolutely. There we go.
Which is used to represent the phallus.
We've answered it.
Yeah.
Male dogs.
Yeah.
Sniff the butts of males and females equally.
Right.
But only have sex with females. Does this make dogs prejudiced?
Good question. That's not altogether true, though, is it?
Do some dogs have sex with other boys?
Yeah. There are gay dogs.
What about the ones that don't?
They should be killed.
Fine.
Yeah.
Fine. Well,
actually, most dogs are polyamorous. Thinking about it, they have multiple partners.
They're quite woke.
They're pretty damn woke. Yeah. I don't know. Told you I can't improvise.
Hey, we've got it. We've nailed it. We worked out the vegetable, and we've got cats and dogs. That's the big three.
All right.
That is the big three.
Is it?
So moving forward now, we are in the midst of Edinburgh Fringe.
Yeah.
You've got the Titania live show. How's that been going?
I love it. It's so much fun. We are dividing audiences, which is exactly what it should be doing.
Have you had many people walk out?
Yeah. We're getting it.
How many people?
I mean, I haven't been here for a lot of the shows, but Alice tells me updates me. Every now and then there's a moment where people walk out. And what's been interesting though is, people walk out of Edinburgh shows all the time, remember, right? Because they've got to get to other shows and things. So you can never be sure.
Yeah.
And you can't assume they're offended.
It's always after the same jokes, though.
Well,
night after night.
Alice has had a couple of examples where people have been explicit about why they're leaving. Now, that rarely happens.
Okay, yeah.
And there was one the other night, she said, the person on the front row just said, I'm sorry, I can't do this, and walked out. And I think, look, I'm sympathetic with anyone who is offended by it or upset, and I would also support their right to leave. Mm-hmm. I can be offended by stuff, and my view is I'll just leave. I'm not going to start whinging about snowflakes and all this sort of stuff. We all get offended by stuff, and we all know what upsets us, and sometimes it's best not to expose yourself to that.
And
right?
everyone has different tolerances, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the purpose of satire is to annoy people as well as to entertain some others. It's not being done right if everyone loves what you're doing, or indeed if everyone hates what you're doing. You want to be splitting people. That's exactly.
Was that an aim when you were writing the
100%? Yeah. I mean, I knew full well that it would annoy people. I wanted it to.
They have bought tickets though.
Well, yeah, but a lot of people in Edinburgh don't know what they're seeing.
Yeah, cool.
That's the problem.
You know the problem there. You've got two good street PRs. The street PRs are so effective. You've got these guys out and they're unbelievable at their job.
On the other hand, I sort of want people to know what it is because I want people to enjoy it. I don't want people not to. I don't want people to go to a show they're not going to enjoy.
Yeah.
I think the tweets are more designed to annoy the general public. Yeah. People who happen upon them and don't know who she is. Mm-hmm. That's funny to me. But yeah, I think if you've invested money in a show, I'd like you to enjoy it
for sure.
So I have said to the flyers, can you just be honest about what this is? Because.
Don't sell them a lie.
If people are thinking they're going to see a stand-up show, for instance, it's not a stand-up show. It's more like a play.
Yeah.
If people think that they're going to see, some feminist thing, I mean, it's obviously mocking contemporary feminism. Mm-hmm. I'd rather people just knew and didn't.
Yeah. Got their money's worth.
Yeah, I think so.
But we're challenged for it. So you've made a Twitter account. You've done all of this stuff, and now there is a living, breathing 1 hour manifestation of a Twitter account.
Yes.
On stage in front of you at the Edinburgh Fringe for 20 nights, 30 nights?
Yeah, 25 shows, yeah.
What does that, how does that feel? Does it just feel like this is the most 21st century thing that's ever happened?
It's an odd one, isn't it? And I certainly didn't expect it to happen. I didn't even know I was going to write a book. When I started this, it wasn't that at all. It's an odd feeling. And also because I know her so well.
Yes.
And then you see this sort of version of it in the flesh.
Has it changed the way that you think about her, having seen it manifest sort of in front of you?
No, I don't think it has, because during the rehearsal process, what we were doing is trying to get Alice's characterization as close as possible to what is in my head. Of course, it's not entirely possible, and of course, an actor will always bring their own interpretation to the role. So, but there's still this creature in my head who is a living, breathing thing, who isn't quite what's on stage, isn't quite, because that's a combination of my writing and Alice's interpretation. It's something, I mean, my friends are a bit worried about me, because sometimes I do talk about her in the third person. I do.
As if she's in the room.
I sort of do.
Is she your imaginary friend?
It's not quite like that, because I'm very self-aware about it. But what I mean is, I have a separate phone for her, for a start.
Okay.
Largely because Twitter will ban you if, you don't want the same phone for both your accounts.
Yes.
Because if she gets banned, I would get banned as well.
Got you.
Twitter make you behave like a drug dealer, basically. And so someone said to me the other day, can you tweet this from Titania, or can you retweet this from Titania? I was like, I haven't got a phone with me. She, it's at home. And I just said it. And she's saying, "Oh, this is worrying. You're now talking about her as though she's a real thing." But it's not a psycho. I know
it's not a psycho.
No, I'm fully 100% self-aware.
Cool.
But it helps to think of her as, because I start to think about the way she would respond to things, which isn't obviously the way that I would respond.
Has it got easier over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first started it, so because I had to delete, I think the tweets are only there from, I went through a period of deleting everything beyond 7 days because people kept mass reporting the tweets, and that's how they do it to get you banned.
Got you.
And now I
don't allow enough time for them to accumulate.
Exactly. I don't do that anymore just because I sort of don't care if I get banned at this point.
I think it's to the stage now as well where you've been mentioned on the Joe Rogan show, like the absolute pinnacles of
I'm fine with the ban. I can do more. The character's out there now.
Yeah.
I can write articles. I can write shows. I can do whatever with it. I don't need the Twitter account really, but I enjoy it. I'm still going to do it. I still enjoy it.
I bet you do.
But the early tweets were not as. I think they were just quite direct, and they were, because there's two types of tweets that she does. There's the joke tweets where she tries to expose the inherent contradiction of the woke way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And then there's the bait tweets where she says something so outrageous she wants people to take it seriously. Mm. And those are normally the right wingers, the Trump voters and people who take it seriously and get angry. Mm-hmm. So there's the two types of tweets. And then and I often get accused of, well, that's not even a joke. That's just, and I was like, yeah, I'm baiting someone there.
Yeah.
When she says that, heterosexuality should be eliminated and stuff like that, and she says future generations will thank us if we do that. Mm-hmm. You know that a lot of the people do get angry, mm-hmm. and it exposes something about their anger as well.
Yeah.
So I like having to go at both sides, to be honest. That's the point.
It must be a fun playground to be able to have that. So what do you think, have you got any idea what you think's next for Titania?
Don't know.
Get the fringe out of the way. Don't forget your lines and your jokes and stuff for your show.
Yeah.
Don't need to. That would be bad.
That would be bad. Yeah. I mean, it's actually the stand-up show I'm doing next week is like a version of the show I toured at the start of the year, mm-hmm. And so it should be all right.
Cool.
I've got 2 days just to rehearse.
Okay.
That'll be fine. I hope. What next? I don't know. I don't like doing the same thing for a long time, so I tend to try and move on. I'm considering writing a book about politics at the moment, which I've been speaking to my agent about, so I might do that. It would be a serious book. I mean, I like the idea of, I've approached this sort of woke movement from the satirical side. Now I quite like to try it from the polemical side.
Has it enhanced your understanding of politics, like on a serious level, playing around and swimming in these sort of waters?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for a start, I mean, I've come from that background. I've always written about politics, and I've always... and I've come from a kind of woke background. I know a lot of woke people, so I've sort of come from that tradition and that, but yeah, it always informs me to talk to people who disagree with me. It always, that's what's so frustrating about so many of these people is they won't talk. They won't debate. They'll just walk away. They won't have the conversation. Whereas actually we've all got a lot to learn from each other. Mm-hmm. And even people who say things that I just hugely disagree with, it's great to hear what they've got to say. Mm-hmm. It's also been really useful to see the way that people perceive me. Mm. So, I'm often told things that I think, which I don't think, but that tells me that maybe I'm not being quite clear enough in how I express myself,
Yes.
One of the big things I get all the time is, you always go on about how you can't say anything anymore, right? I've never said that. I don't think it, and I've never said it. Mm. I can say whatever I damn well please, and I do. Mm. The point I'm making is that in the current climate that we live in, if I was still a teacher, for instance, I wouldn't be tweeting the way I am now, because I'd be fired, right?
Very quickly.
So I think I am in a privileged position because I'm a comedian, mm-hmm, and I can say whatever I want, mm-hmm. and I can get away with it. But I know that if I were to go back to teaching now, I can never get a teaching job anymore. Because they just do a cursory Google search, and I'm over, right? Yeah. I mean, when I was a teacher, I had... parents complaining because they'd Googled me and read some of my jokes online, and they complained to the head. So it was already getting a bit
touchy.
Yeah. So it isn't that I'm saying that we can't say anything anymore. What I'm saying is most people who are in normal jobs, not fake jobs like what I do, right? Normal jobs, they feel under pressure to not joke with their workmates. They feel like they have to restrict their jokes to encrypted WhatsApp conversations because if they are heard and misunderstood mm-hmm. or taken at face value, which is a common thing people do with comedy now, then they're going to lose their jobs. That is a dangerous climate to be in. We had it with Bridget's article. People are afraid to express opinions online. People who email me saying, I like your stuff, but I'm not going to say it publicly. Yeah. So we are living indisputably in a culture where people are self-censoring routinely now, out of fear of either what your peers will say, what the people on social media are going to do to you. Because remember, their tactic is often to try and stop your livelihood. Go to your employer, complain to your employer,
pass it up the chain until they find a weak link.
Or people are afraid of the state. In the UK, we have a horrible situation where we have hate speech laws that have led to people being imprisoned for jokes they've written on Facebook. Actual jail time, right?
Konstantin Kissis says that in all of Russia, every person that was jailed, I want to say last year, because of jokes they made on social media, 400. The UK, 3,000.
He's talking about arrests. Jail for jokes is very rare, but it has happened.
Cool.
It should never happen, by the way, but it has happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, arrests, investigations, it's over 3,000 in this country and 400 in Russia. That tells you an awful lot. Hate speech laws should be abolished. Absolutely, clearly. People should be entitled to express hateful views if they want to. That's not to say I support those hateful views. I absolutely don't. But you've got to think on balance. What is better here, right? I'd love to live in a society where everyone was nice to each other and no one said these horrible, ghastly things, right? I'd love that. That's not the real world. There are some awful people out there who say some horrible things, but is the solution to that to give the state power to lock people away if they don't agree with what they say? Because that's where we are. You've got to think about it in balance. What's the bigger picture? I'd rather live in a free society where I'm going to hear some idiot on a street corner shouting about how I should go to hell because I'm gay. I'd rather hear that, right? Than have a situation where the government can say, well, this is no longer acceptable, so now we're going to investigate and arrest you for that, which is what's happening. The guy got investigated in Humberside for retweeting a poem about trans issues. Right? He got investigated. But the police phoned him up and said, we've got to check your thinking. Right? And that should never happen. But it's happening as a matter of routine. And we know this because when people complained to the police about it, they said, but this is just common across the country. If you go on the government's hate crime legislation website, it will talk about non-crime hate incidents that are logged as part of the hate crime statistics. So when you hear about these hate crime statistics, you've got to remember that a lot of them are people phoning the police saying, someone called me gay and I'm upset about it. And that gets logged. No investigation needed. It's logged. Because if that person perceives that it was homophobic, that's it. It's really worrying. And it's not authoritarian in the way that fascist Italy was authoritarian, but it is a kind of creeping authoritarianism, and it has an authoritarian aspect to it that needs to be resisted. And we shouldn't be complacent about this stuff. But the problem is no one wants to address it.
You're very right. You are very right indeed. Moving forward, last thing, what are the two most likely routes that you can see us going down over the sort of next couple of years in terms of how the discourse is going to mature?
Okay. So I've been asked this question before. The truth is I don't know, obviously, because I'm not clairvoyant, but I do think we are reaching a kind of tipping point, right? Well, you've got, so the woke activists are the minority, and that's the consolation we should all take. They just
a very loud one.
It's not just loud, they have power. And that's what's dangerous about them. I mean, they're mostly bourgeois, they're mostly privately educated, so they tend to occupy those roles in society where they are opinion forming. They overly dominate the law, journalism, the media, the arts, all of these sorts of areas, universities certainly. So you end up in a situation where they are dictating the sort of common discourse, right? But the problem is they're a minority. For them, this is their problem. They're a minority and people aren't buying it. And the more they push it, the more people push back. Mm-hmm. So, I hate the idea of dismissing millennials or the millennial generation. Most millennials think this is bullshit, right? It is the minority, and particularly student activists, the type of kids who end up in student politics. They tend to be, quite narcissistic. They're not representative of the student body. But everyone else they just want to get drunk and have fun, and they'll go along with it. They'll be like, okay, we won't applaud. We'll do jazz hands instead. If that makes you happy, we'll just do it for an easy life. Of course, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the norm. And then, and people grow up, of course, and they go beyond that. What worries me? I mean, I blame my generation. I think it's Generation X that fostered this stuff and caused this stuff by indulging it. But so what will happen, I think, is, and particularly Generation Z. I mean, the millennials are getting old now, right? They're past it now. I mean, this is
96. You've got to be born after 96.
I'm only just not a millennial.
Yeah.
Like people forget this. Like the millennial generation it's had its day. I mean, all the statistics seem to suggest that Generation Z are pushing way back against this stuff. They've got no time for it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even get that. You know, I think that's what's going to happen. So, and maybe they're sensing their power slipping, and that's why they're getting more and more aggressive.
Yeah,
that's what people do when they're threatened, when their power base is threatened. They start being shrieking even louder.
Yeah,
and so they won't go down easy. But they'll never win because they just don't have the numbers. And this stuff is totally unpersuasive.
So is the main fear longer term that this causes the backlash from the right?
Well, that is a fear, yeah, and that's why we have to take this woke movement down as quickly as possible, because that's a genuine fear that could happen. Yeah, I think how we get. I don't know. The truth is, I don't know. Maybe they will dominate, and who knows? I mean, that would be terrible to culture to live in.
Awful day, yeah.
But I like to think that most people are sick of it. Most people are gonna fight back against it, and things will change for the better. But that's me because I'm an optimist. That's what I think will happen.
I like it. Andrew, thank you so much for coming up. I've really enjoyed it. The Edinburgh Fringe Show, by the time this goes up, we'll have seen whether or not you've had any catastrophes on stage, but I'm
nothing. I mean,
not.
Yeah, we were worried. We thought, some idiot's going to come along and throw milkshakes or anything. Nothing like that's happened.
Absolutely great. Well, I'm going to bring a milkshake. I'm going to bring it to drink to your show on Tuesday.
Yeah, actually, we'll throw it, because actually that'd be good publicity.
That'd be great publicity, but I also don't want to be ousted on Twitter by Titania McGrath and a 400,000 followers or whatever it is. Links to everything that we've spoken about today, including the articles, Andrew's Twitter, Titania's Twitter, everything else will be in the show notes below. If you've enjoyed the episode, please give us a like, give us a share. Definitely give Titania and Andrew a follow. They're absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate you coming and seeing me, man.
Thanks a lot. Really enjoyed it.
It's been great.